Okay, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to spend time with you. What for me is an afternoon in Toronto. Welcome to you from wherever you are. We're going to begin today with land acknowledgement. I'm using the land acknowledgement for the city of Toronto, where I'm located right now. And it's an important acknowledgement, even as we gather virtually, to think about our place and to acknowledge that the land of Toronto, where I am, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And the city of Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you for joining us today, wherever you are. We've got so many different places popping up in the chat, so thank you and welcome. I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker. Mary Beth Cavert is an independent scholar specializing in the personal, historical, and literary context of L.M. Montgomery's kinship ties. Her research has been published in various Montgomery essay collections and has informed the notes for several volumes of Montgomery's complete journals. She contributes to and publishes The Shining Scroll and runs the L.M. Montgomery Literary Society social media accounts and website. She is a founding member of the board of the Friends of the L.M. Montgomery Institute, a member of the editorial board of the Journal of L.M. Montgomery Studies, and a recipient of the 2020 L.M. Montgomery Institute Legacy Award. Thank you so much to Beth for joining us today. We can sit back now and look forward to her wonderful presentation.
All right, thank you, Daniela. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks to Ben and Andrea and the committee and Caroline and everybody for inviting me. And I am going to, I've got several images I'm going to use, so I would like to kind of credit images that will be coming up to the University of Guelph Montgomery collection, the Duncan MacMillan family, the Gordon family, Lafergie family, the Webb family, the Lockhart family, Jack Hutton, and Archives Canada. All right, the material that I'm sharing today is explained more fully in my paper in the Journal of L.M. Montgomery Studies called Reading Between the Lines, which you are welcome to access at your leisure. I very much enjoyed writing that paper when I was done writing the paper, and I owe much to the editors for actually making it readable. All right, we're going to start off with a title slide. I will just start and we'll let you know when a new slide should come up. All right. One of the reasons that countless readers enjoy and return again and again to L.M. Montgomery stories is to wrap themselves up in the relationships and friendships she created in them. Friendship was the door that I chose to enter the imagination of L.M. Montgomery, sparked by the statement of a scholar at the first Montgomery conference at the University of Prince Edward Island. And that statement was, Montgomery's writings are a record of her desire for the kind of friends she craved. And then the speaker went on to present an excellent paper, but I was kind of stuck on this sentence. I'd already decided I wanted to present at the next conference, and the statement sparked a question that I wanted to pursue. I decided to explore the topic of friendship in Montgomery's life. My key was to use all of her book dedications to identify significant people and examine her relationships with them. And indeed, I found that Montgomery had many authentic relationships and that she didn't crave for friends, but she craved their presence and mourned their absences. For me, the stories behind the dedications not only reveal Montgomery's tight circle of friends, but also illuminate some context for her writing, as well as insight into how some of these significant impressions find their way into her books at times. So getting started on all of this, in 1994, I started to supplement Montgomery's published letters and irregular threads about her friends and her journals by contacting the family members of her friends to find letters, hear recollections, see family artifacts, as well as examining historical records to support or amend oral histories. As a result of that research, I was able to share the importance of friends named Nora Lafergie, Laura Pritchard, Alexina McGregor, and Alec and May McNeil to an audience at the 1996 Montgomery Conference. After that, parts of that work appeared in some of the things you see here on the screen, the Lucy Maud Montgomery album, which is one of my favorites. You should get it. And other venues is Kindred Spirits magazine, the periodical that I published, The Shining Scroll. There's Intimate Life and Montgomery's Rainbow Valleys, which is about her years in Ontario. After sharing some of my research, I was glad to see that some small things, like overlooked events like poet John McCrae's presence at Montgomery's meeting with Lord Earl Grey had been noticed, and that there had been a reevaluation of the importance of her year living in Prince Albert. In recent years, I ended up not meaning to, but ended up untangling the family tree of Myrtle McNeil Webb, who grew up at Green Gables, for her grandchildren and family. And with a very bad pun here, I'm going to say it truly was a tangled web. But I would think my most exciting, my most favorite early discoveries were the previously unknown lives of Nora Lafergie and Hattie Gordon, two accomplished and remarkable women. It has been a wonderful experience to locate some of the families and show them that their great-grandparent was a very valued family friend to a famous author. Okay, so, and I mean, as you may know in your own family, not too many people know much about their great-grandparents. And we're, that many generations removed from Montgomery. I mean, I am anyway. And so when I located some descendants of her friends, they had no idea that their great-grandmother, for example, Hattie Gordon, that their great-grandmother's name appears on millions of books. So they were pretty happy about that. So Montgomery's friends. So these are some of the book dedications. In her 21 books published during her lifetime, Montgomery chose to acknowledge and honor one cat and 21 different people, aside from her parents. There were 11 women and 10 men. Among these were 3 couples and 1 family, and all of her fans. So we're in there too, yay. And while we hear most about her female friends, there's a very fine group of men in this list. 3 pen pals, 3 soldiers, 3 spouses, and 1 boyfriend. In addition to some of the older generations, there's a small circle of her best female friends, as I mentioned some of them earlier. Cousin Bertie McIntyre from the Montgomery family, cousins Fred and Stella Campbell, who were related to her on every single side of her family, Myrtle McNeil Webb, and Tilly Mackenzie Houston, she's from the Woolner family, and then Laura and Nora. In 1931, Montgomery stated her basis for selecting the dedication. I cannot bring myself to put on the title page of my books the name of any person who has not meant something to me in the way of inspiration and friendship. I would like to add another personality here who's not included in these kinship categories, but a name you will find in her journals and biographies, and whom I will include here because Montgomery also dedicated 2 of her books to her fans, and this does include a friend wannabe. One of these fans was an obsessive and persistent neighbor, because she didn't live very far away, named Isabel Anderson, who appeared later in Montgomery's life and wished to break into the author's intimate circle of friends. But she could not do that because when it came to cultivating friendship, Maud Montgomery was very cautious and selective. There was a threshold for Montgomery's close friends. They had to share history, culture, and memories. They had to trust each other and be at ease. and tease each other. And because of these elements, they could talk about anything. True friends for Montgomery were worthy of a photo on her wall, a book dedication, a shared long meal, or visits to gather in special places like Lover's Lane, the Mammoth Caves, Niagara Falls, a river, a field, or a farm. Her relationships within this group of dedication names was formed early in her life, most by 1903 when she was 29, before her first book was published, and most importantly, before she became famous. Such was the case for a man she called my dear Mr. M. So George MacMillan was the first of any of her male friends to whom she dedicated a book. And she chose Emily of New Moon in 1923 to George Boyd MacMillan, Alloa, Scotland. This came after 20 years of correspondence, of writing to each other. And yet they had 20 years to go after this. She intentionally identified his location, which was near many sites of Scottish literature and history. Her choice of this dedication reflected her own heritage as a fifth-generation Canadian Scot, and the book was imbued with her experience and understanding of Scottish traditions, clan identity, and oral history. All of these things, I am not a Scottish literature expert, so I am referring you to the work of Scottish historian and L.M. Montgomery literature expert, Dr. Jenny Lidster, who's here today. So you can look her up. Like many of her other books, New Moon was directly connected to the person in its dedication. With MacMillan, she shared more than friendship. They shared a literary heritage and ambition and a sense of identity. When she was writing Emily in 1921, she was also recopying her personal journals, which she had started in 1889. And it seems that she was copying the period of mid-1911 at the same time she was writing Emily. Because while she was writing Emily, she wrote in her journal that the genesis of the character Emily Birdstar had occurred 10 years earlier. And that coincided with events occurring during her honeymoon and planning of her honeymoon in the summer of 1911, when she and her husband traveled to Scotland and England. She wrote, "She has been Emily for the past 10 years. During the time I have been carrying her in my mind and waiting for the time when I could put her into a book. It was no coincidence that New Moon was populated with the star family, S-T-A-R-R, as well as celestial stars, an attribute that MacMillan enjoyed as a fellow admirer of the night sky. They both loved astronomy. She placed her autobiographical heroine, a writer like Montgomery and MacMillan, within a fertile environment of supernatural visions, fairy landscapes, and veils of reality. Throughout the Emily series, she emphasized Emily's Scottish roots and family, which, like Montgomery's own community, provided Emily with both strength and conflict in developing her creative voice. You can read more about that in Elizabeth Waterston's book, Magic Island. All right, on this slide, on the left, there's a diagram of how they met. They started writing to each other near the end of, excuse me, 1903, after both became part of a writers group, which was started by Miriam Zieber, an aspiring writer in Philadelphia. MacMillan was probably invited to contact Zieber by his colleague, neighbor, and friend, Roy Carmichael. And he had already joined what he called the American Writers Club. Montgomery joined through her contact with a different writer, Frank Beverly. Beverly had written her a fan letter and said, "Oh, by the way, you should join this group." And so Zieber acted as a matchmaker and introduced MacMillan to Montgomery. And they entered into conversations that would continue until her death in 1942. His letters are gone, but some of their content is revealed through Montgomery's responses to his questions. She would write the question that he asked and then her response. This picture here is how they looked in 1903 or so when they started writing to each other. And I like her, he starts to say, he starts a conversation about love and relationships, which she characterizes as a psychological problem, which I thought was pretty humorous. And he starts what I think is sort of a response to meeting her fiance. And he starts asking her questions about love and recognizing love. And anyway, I thought this conversation really fascinated me. Her letters record some unique glimpses into her life and personality, some of which are not repeated in her journals or other existing documents. All right, so MacMillan had intuitive taste and gifts, and very frequently sent her books, periodicals, and clippings, which she enjoyed very much and enjoyed reading. He loved the outdoors, walking and gardening, just like she did. He mailed pressed flowers, bulbs, and seeds to her, and she also sent those things to him. He was creative and funny, and he was always upbeat. They both shared the ability to escape into worlds of imagination, to create their own ideal world. MacMillan's importance is perhaps most evident in a daydream she experienced in 1922 on a vacation in Bala, Ontario, which she described in her journal in July 1922. But she changed it when she wrote the same scene to MacMillan in a letter later in September. I'm going to explore those differences in the next Montgomery conference, and the topic is on revision. So I'm going to try to figure out the intent in the change. You can see her in this cropped image of a postcard photo. There's a postcard photo of a group of tourists at Bala at the Roselawn Inn, and in the background is the inn, and she's on the porch. And so that picture was put on a postcard and appeared in magazines, and she's sitting on the porch. So I enlarged that a bit so you could see it easier. And what I've never noticed before, which I did a while ago, is that there seems to be a gentleman there interrupting her reverie, which is usually her fate when she's trying to have some quiet time to herself. Some guy walks up and starts talking to her. But anyway, so while she rested on the porch of Roselawn Inn, she imagined what it would be like to vacation in a summer cottage in this Muskoka region on an island with her husband and children and a select small group of people. The people she chose were all family members, her Aunt Annie Campbell and cousins Stella and Frederica, and her 43-year-old unmarried Montgomery cousin, Bertie McIntyre. And there was one non-relative, George MacMillan. In her letter to him, after she describes the adventures and shenanigans for all of them, she wrote that in her next dreaming, she would marry George to Bertie, and they would live happily ever after. So here are photos of Bertie and George at about that time. I kind of think that he's got a little bit of an Ernest Hemingway vibe here. Anyway, this vacation in Bala was so rejuvenating that she interrupted writing the third Emily book in 1924 to write the Muskoka-centered novel, The Blue Castle, a love story of the North Woods. So just as an aside here, in The Blue Castle, there's a character named Barney Snaith, also known as John Foster, and who is a common subject for fans to ask, and by fans, I mean us, you there, who like to ask, who of her friends would he have been in real life? Jack and Linda Hutton have nominated Montgomery's former suitor and Muskoka cottage builder, John Mustard, as a real life representative, and that's an excellent selection, while Mary Rubio favors handsome and robust Reverend Edwin Smith as a Barney inspiration. Also an excellent candidate. And of course, Montgomery didn't model people exactly after people she knew. She dumped every image and personality that she knew into the stew of her imagination, and out came some of these characters. But anyway, I'm gonna toss in this Scottish man as another candidate. But MacMillan most probably never chopped down a tree, but he was kind of an outdoorsy John Foster kind of person. He liked trees. He admired the natural world, and he was an inhabitant of a country with plenty of bluish castles. Well, Maud and George met in person only once, spending almost 2 weeks together during her honeymoon in Scotland and England in 1911. They had a wonderful time together. She with her new husband, and he with a sudden but soon departed fiance. Maud really liked him as much in person as on paper. Montgomery biographer, Dr. Molly Gillen, suggested that MacMillan was closer to her own spiritual wavelength compared to Ephraim Weber, another literary friend. Readers of her letters to Weber MacMillan, you can see the difference for yourself, but the unique quality of each correspondence has been summarized by Dr. Jenny Lidster. She says, although many passages in the letters to MacMillan and Weber are identical, Montgomery's friendship with each man is a distinctive thing. With Weber, she shared nationality, but not identity. With MacMillan, her common ground was the Scottish inheritance that informed Montgomery's Canadian identity. Now I'd like to just do a brief, another mention about Molly Gillen. So near the end of his life and after his death, Montgomery's letters to MacMillan were left in the care of MacMillan's nephew and niece. 20 years later, Molly Gillen was seeking his letters and located them in 1973 by contacting the librarians in his town. So a shout out to librarians everywhere. You can find everything. The local librarians put Molly Gillen in touch with MacMillan's friend, John Gardner. Gardner met with the relatives, convinced them to let him take Montgomery's letters to Gillen on loan. Molly was living in London at the time. She took them to Ottawa, Ontario, to be copied onto microfilm and arranged for the letters to be purchased by the Library and Archives of Canada. The LAC bought them from the family, and Gillen used them to write an article before the centennial of Montgomery's birth for the Chatelaine magazine in July 1973. Maud Montgomery, the girl who wrote Green Gables. She expanded the article into a book, The Wheel of Things, a biography, in 1975. And after that, she handed the actual letters over to the LAC representative who was in London at the time. Then in 1980, the late Dr. Francis William Pius Bolger and Dr. Elizabeth Epperly edited the letters and published portions of them as My Dear Mr. M. Dr. Bolger had received permission from Montgomery's son, Dr. Stuart MacDonald, to publish the letters, and he invited Betsy to join him in sifting through the hundreds of pages to select a body of text a publisher would accept. There are over 180 letters and cards in the MacMillan Complete Collection, but only 51 full or partial letters, notes, and cards, that's about 37% of the entire correspondence, were included in My Dear Mr. M. Betsy said that they spent a couple years of proofreading a typescript of the letters and agonizing over the deletions that they would have to make, only to find that their editor wanted them to cut in half the text they had already vastly reduced. So here are, some pictures of the photocopies of the letters and some of the postcards. Several years ago, Father B and Betsy asked me to update the entire transcription. It took some time for me to get copies of all the original letters and even more time to transcribe all of it. And I got help from Jenny Litzter, Betsy Epperly, and Carolyn Collins to decode her handwriting. When I thought I was done, and don't ever think that, Betsy called me with the shocking news that more MacMillan material had been found. His family in Scotland had uncovered a photo album, among other things, with over 70 postcards from Ellen Montgomery. So I quickly started to date the cards from photos taken with a phone and put them in the correct order of letters. And I didn't do that very well. I didn't read the dates on some of them and made mistakes. But over time, and with the help of editors and website managers, managed to make some corrections. And so now I think that the complete collection of letters and cards that I put together from Ellen Montgomery is pretty close to being in order. My manuscript has all the letters we know about, all the postcards from her, and a few from her husband, Ewan MacDonald. And I should add that Ewan and George were friends. They met right after Ewan went to university in Glasgow in 1906, and this is right after he had proposed. They met again during the MacDonald's honeymoon, of course. This puts MacMillan in a very special circle. Close friends of Montgomery who were also friends and acquaintances of Ewan, like her cousins, Fred, Stella, and Bertie, Tilly Houston, the Webb family, and the families of the soldiers in Leasdale. Okay, so a little bit about MacMillan and where he lived. The map on the left is a map of her honeymoon tour, and I tried to kind of color code kind of their day trips and cluster where they went. MacMillan was born in January 1881. He was 6 years younger than Ellen Montgomery, although she told him she was 26 instead of 29 in her first letter. He was the youngest child of John MacMillan and Anne Gentle, with 3 older brothers and 3 older sisters. His father was a second-generation grocer on Mill Street in the center of Alloa, Scotland. Alloa was a harbor and trading port, kind of at the place where the River Forth becomes the Firth of Forth, roughly between Stirling and Edinburgh. It was mostly known at the time for glass making, woolen and textile mills, pottery, machinery, breweries, and the coal trade. By the time George was 8, his father had died and the family moved to a different residence located on Castle Street, which seems to be near the warehouse district. When he started to write to Montgomery, they each had experienced the death of a parent, and that affected their circumstances when they were young, of course. They both lived with an older relative, Montgomery with her grandmother, and MacMillan with his mother, which probably prevented them, either one of them, from leaving home at that time. His sister worked in the woolen mills and the yarn factory. His brothers worked at the nearby port. His brother John married the daughter of the Norwegian harbor master, and it was 2 of his children who inherited Montgomery's letters. In the summer of 1904, after 9 years as a printer and a few months as Montgomery's pen pal, MacMillan applied for and was hired as a reporter at the Alloa Journal. He wrote humorous poetry, and one of the things that he wrote in was a regular lighthearted column called Round the Bandstand. He spent some of his free time hiking north of the town into the landscapes of Clackmannanshire and the Uckle Hills. He was known to walk through the night after finishing work at the paper, a practice that enabled him and his co-worker, John Gardner, to see rare wonders like the aurora borealis. He once hiked from dawn to sunset around the Uckles, and he climbed the highest of the Uckle Hills called Ben Clwch to watch the sunrise. And beyond Alloa were heights of thundering waterfalls that came together at Castle Campbell, a spectacular medieval ruin. And it was the image on my title slide. And I think this one reminded her of a blue castle, if one must have a blue castle. This dramatically situated castle high above nearby Dollar Glen, where Maud and Ewan hiked together one day they hiked up one of these chasms toward the castle. She doesn't ever say she actually got there, but she did send a postcard of the castle to her Campbell relatives in Park Corner. She couldn't have chosen a correspondent from a more appealing environment. Scotland is the most delightful and interesting land on earth, she wrote in her first letter in 1903. All right, on this next slide, there are photographs of George MacMillan and his many friends, none of whom I can identify for you, nor can his family. They might be co-workers, they might be touring groups. Who knows? It may be a gathering after work, who knows? But he's the one with the mustache in these pictures. George was considered a brilliant man by his friends who could have become more widely known if he had moved away from his small town. His work was frequently sold to Punch in the Strand magazine. He was known locally for his clever parodies, poetry, and songs. Ongoing hypertension may have made him cautious about changes. While Montgomery's later life was buffeted about in gales of lawsuits, erratic behaviors of family members, and congressional politics, MacMillan's life appears to have been predictable and unchanging, but happy. There was no bend in his road. Our newspaper articles praised MacMillan at his retirement and after his death. He was respected and loved by his community. He was humorous, kind, and conscientious in his work. And although he did not seek it, he gained a measure of fame through his friendship with Lucy Maud Montgomery. George's longtime employer, Malcolm Gardner, sold the newspaper in October 1946. Suffering from poor eyesight, he retired at age 66 after decades of work at local papers. MacMillan never married, and he had lived in the same house on Castle Street since boyhood. At age 72, he resided for a short time at the Church of Scotland Eventide home called Inglewood before his death in December 1952. His obituary was published on January 3, 1953. In her last note to him, Montgomery wrote, "There are few things in my life I have prized as much as your friendship and letters." Montgomery and MacMillan shared an uncomplicated affection for each other and reveled in their shared experiences and sensitivities. George would never meet prime ministers and kings or walk on the shores of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but he could experience those things vicariously through Montgomery's letters. And he could applaud her success over the years and provide the kind of genuine affirmation that we all need, no matter how famous. The author would never travel to all the places in Great Britain that George visited on his holidays and hikes, but she could enjoy them through the descriptions and pictures he sent her. Their common ground was found in a deep love of stories, science, beloved companion cats, and the natural world. It was sustained through their keen sense of humor and unfailing support of each other. Through the intimacy of his letters, readers can share some of the delights and candor of an author in the private moments of her life. That's it.
So I just struggling to unmute myself. Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely wonderful. This is the time when we open it up to the floor. Are there questions that anyone in the group wants to share? You can put your question into the chat. You have the option to unmute your mic if you want to ask your question directly. We'll give the audience a chance to let the rich presentation percolate. We'll see what kind of questions emerge. Thank you so much, Beth. That was absolutely magnificent and such a moving reflection on the power of friendship in Montgomery's life. I think Caroline is monitoring the chat for questions. Or Ben, are you keeping an eye on the chat?
I have been, yeah.
And so have I, and lots of wonderful, 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 thank you, fascinating, which I echo heartily.
Mm-hmm. There,
Thank you.
your comment, Beth, about Montgomery lying to MacMillan about her age, like subtracting 3 years off her age, has led to a lot of tongue-in-cheek conversation about why she did that. And Jenny reminded us that 29 would have been considered in Montgomery's time very, very firmly into old maid territory, and reminded us that Valency at the beginning of the Blue Castle is 29 and is considered therefore like irredeemably unmarriageable. So 26 sounds better. And
Right.
I've reminded people that 25 is considered the first corner for an unmarried woman in Anne's House of Dreams. So 26 is just a bit beyond the first corner. So
Right. I think she should have just gone straight to 23, you know. Why stop at 3 years? Go
well,
for 6.
I suppose, but the other thing too, and I don't know if you found this, Beth, but I've been trying to decipher her. So for those of you who have never seen her handwriting, well, as you've seen in some of Beth's slides, a lot of it is a little bit tricky. And if you can kind of figure out what most of the letters mean, that you can kind of guess the word most of the time. But a big problem is digits. And I was looking at something today in her scrapbook, and I thought, is that an 8? Is that a 9? Is that a 7? Is that a 6? And like all the numbers kind of look the same.
Yes.
So in this case, it could be that, well, I mean, if Beth, you tell us, is 26 unambiguously 26, or is there any possibility that the 6 could be a 9?
No, I think that was pretty clear. So
Okay, good, because sometimes it isn't.
no, I mean, she was not above fudging a little bit, here and there. So uh, I, you know, yeah, I think it just shows a bit of self-consciousness, kind of, I think she had heard from him. Yeah, she had heard from him first, and he would have told her how old he was. And what's interesting is that he was exactly the same age of all of her best friends. Bertie McIntyre, Frederica Kemp, they were all 6, 7, 8 years younger than she was. Because she was one of the older grandchildren in her family. And she was quite comfortable with people in that age group. But yeah, I think she, for the very reason you stated, she thought, I better shave off a few years just to make him feel a little more at home, perhaps. I think he felt too much at home because of that. So, I think, he was trying to do a little bit of courting there. And if she had said she was 29, maybe he wouldn't have, but it made it a lot more fun to read the letters.
That leads us, segues very nicely to Danielle's question. If they were in the same place in slightly different circumstances, do you think there might have been some sort of long-term, would they have been compatible in a marriage relationship?
If you mean if they lived in the same country, for example.
Yeah, if they hadn't been, apart from an ocean.
Possibly, but at the end of this long, during all of 1907, he keeps pounding questions at her. What do you see? What do you want in a partner? And he had met Ewan. I think Ewan told him they were engaged just to, because Ewan says, "Oh, she's got a pen pal that she writes to all the time, and she wants me to meet him. I better meet him right away, see what's going on." And I think he told him or made it clear that they were engaged, that they were a couple. And I think my take on it is that George MacMillan said, "Who is this guy? He doesn't seem at all like what I would imagine would be a person that she would be interested in." So he starts saying, what are you looking for in a partner? And she pretty much says, "Well, I basically I don't, really look for anything, but I'm attracted to people who aren't like me." So there. But
yeah, thank you, Danielle, for that, because I was wondering that too, because they just seemed so compatible in terms of their communication, in terms of their openness with each other. And I always want a happier ending for people who don't have happy endings.
Well, at the end of this conversation, she finally pretty much tells him she's settled. You know, she says, basically, I think if two people are matched in their status, you know, in their socioeconomic position or in their education, and, you know, kind of get along, you know, that's good enough. And so I think that was a clear message to him. She also sent him a poem, and in my paper, you explore this. It's called Fate, and it's about, you know, when two people travel parallel paths and are very in tune to each other, but their paths never cross. They never meet. This is fate. And I think that was her message to him. Hey, you know, you seem like a nice guy, but it's never going to happen.
Yes. Jenny wants to know where the photographs of George and his buddies came from.
Yeah. The photographs come from Duncan MacMillan, who is the grandson of the niece that he left the letters to. So he left the letters to a nephew and niece. They would have been in their 50s or so. And they lived nearby. They worked in some of the factories near Alua. I think they were in Clackmannan. He sent me the pictures, and they're little tiny ones. So I had to kind of play with them to make them a little more visible. So not unknown to Molly Gillen, the niece had a child. And so her descendants found in this child's belongings after he passed away a box with a photo album, and it probably had some different pictures in it. And then in the, you know, as they went through it, here were all these pictures from Canada, postcards. And so they contacted, I think they contacted Kate McDonald Butler, and she contacted Betsy, and Donna Campbell, a great benefactor of the Institute, helped arrange a purchase for the collection. And they arrived at Prince Edward Island. A box from Scotland arrived the day before lockdown of COVID. So Simon and Betsy, and I mean, they were going through this stuff really fast because the campus was closed down. They wouldn't be able to look at it. So, and they're wonderful people. Duncan MacMillan, his father was also named Duncan. His grandmother was named Margareta. Her father was the Norwegian harbor master. And very sweet people and so generous. So, you know, he said, we found some more photographs, and we don't have any idea who the people are, but it looks like George. So here's some. So I'm sending some of them back because some of them are the other side of the family, and not the MacMillan side. But yeah, so that's where I got those, and I just loved them. And there was one of George MacMillan with a couple other friends, and he's holding his beloved cat. He loved cats. They had a lot of affinity with cats, and he's holding the cat, but the picture's blurred, so I just couldn't use it. But he named his cat, one of his cats was named Hello America. And after that cat died, there was America the Second. And that was of great interest to me, because I had thought, where does this name come from? So I've got a footnote in the manuscript, but I think there was the first transatlantic radio broadcast between Britain and the US happened in about 1923, which is when he got this cat, and the call signal was "Hello America." So I think he's just a funny guy. He said, I just got this cat, Hello America. I'm going to name the cat Hello America, and when I get another one, I'll call it America the Second. So yeah, I think I liked him. I liked him a lot.
I have a follow-up question about the letters. Did everyone save letters in those days? Did he save them out of sentiment, or did he know that they would be valuable in the future?
I mean, he may have known they would be valuable, but I think he saved them out of sentiment, and I don't think he could bear to throw them away. And I think he had them in a trunk, if I remember right. Put them in a trunk, and gave them to, and he gave all the books she sent to him. I think to them, those got sold because they ended up in Glasgow in a bookshop in Glasgow, and the University of Guelph bought them like in 1989. So they've been in bookshops, so the whole collection. So we've got the letters that Molly Gillen found were bought by Archives Canada. So letters are in Archives Canada. Books by Montgomery are in Guelph. And then postcards and other material are at the University of Prince Edward Island. So, I mean, somehow, it got split up, but he saved it out of sentiment. And she knew he wasn't going to write a biography of her like the other pen pal, Ephraim Weber. He said, "Oh, I'm going to write a biography from her." And she said, "No, you aren't." I want that. And MacMillan wouldn't have ever really, I don't think he would have traded in on that. And I don't think his niece and nephew considered that they were worth anything until this stranger comes in and says, "Hey, we want this box of letters, and the government of Canada would like to buy them." But it helped them. I mean, one of the differences between MacMillan and Montgomery was, I think, economic. Their economic level. She was a little oblivious maybe to his fairly modest circumstances, I think. So I don't know that the family, I think they were going to throw him out. I think, they were, by the time Molly Gillen got to them, they were 70 years old. And I think they were a little crowded in their place. And I think she wrote that they were about to throw him out just to make more room. And
wow.
So, yeah. Thanks, Molly.
Yes. Carol asking, do you think that any of these publishers who are now, since there is this renewed interest in Montgomery, do you think that there will ever be a full edition of the MacMillan letters and or postcards published as a book?
Well, this is my manuscript, and I'm hoping that that'll happen. It's ready, and I'm trying. It won't be this spring, but we'll see. It's over 200,000 words because there's like 170,000 words of letters and correspondence. And then I threw some of my own in there. So yeah, it's a big book.
Well, if there's a publisher you want us to start hitting up with just random tweets and queries, sure would be nice to have a complete collection of the complete MacMillan.
Well,
letters.
I'm talking with somebody, and I'll send this tape. I'll send this video to them.
Excellent. Yes.
So we'll see. Yeah, I I think it's going to be quite a challenge because, of course, like Ben's done a lot of this kind of work, and you edit a bunch of stuff, and you want to have something that you wrote in there, and you want to annotate it so there's context and it makes sense, and that builds the bulk of the project. So yeah, I've tried to inflate it to gargantuan size. So well, we'll see. Maybe it'll be an encyclopedia of letters or something.
I think 2 volumes would be fine, frankly, but
yeah.
What do I know?
Yeah. I don't know. I think a book of this size might be a little cumbersome in this day and age. And of course, we mostly would like to have it be an ebook. I did have a publisher interested in only doing an ebook. But I said, no, I'm an old-fashioned kind of person. I'd really kind of like a book. So, but an ebook is kind of nice because you can search so easily. It's.
Yeah, well, ideally, maybe both. My finding with the gargantuan Pioneer Girl manuscript by Laura Ingalls Wilder was that I loved the book. I love it. But reading it was so cumbersome. But when I finally got it on a Kindle, between the two of them, I kind of ripped through the book. It just was finding my, but I wouldn't give up my hard copy for anything.
Right.
Well, we're approaching the end of our time together today. Thank you so much to Mary Beth Cavert for this fascinating window into Montgomery's friendship with George Boyd MacMillan. It was a pleasure to spend time with all of you today. This is the end of the formal part, but stick around for the informal part of our conversation after I turn off the recording. Thank you so much, Mary Beth.
Thank you. Thank you. I loved it. It's good to see everyone.